Has spring sprung? Has it happened? Anyway, it seems pretty nice out there today to me, and I welcome you back this morning to these opportunities to talk about the miracles of Jesus. Do you have Quakers in Canada? Friends, people of that flavor? Yes? Okay. I want to start with a quote from a Quaker, from somebody of the Friends persuasion religiously. Have you ever heard of the name Elton Trueblood? I would guess some of you did. He actually wrote a book on the humor of Christ. It's not very funny, but it is a subject that is important. In fact, I think that if I remember my details about this just right, that one of the people that served here was a friend of mine. I became acquainted with him in the Academy of Homiletics, named Blaine Banting. Does this ring any bells from days gone by? And I think Blaine was going to work on his doctorate and going to call it The Quest for the Hilarious Jesus. Now that's a play off of the word, the quest for the historical Jesus, of which in church history there have been three quests where scholars are trying to wrestle with what did Jesus really say. That's kind of the basis of it. The current one is called the Jesus Seminar. It's called the third quest for the historical Jesus. But Blaine was wanting to do one on the hysterical Jesus. Some of the things Jesus said were very funny. Now, we've lost it somewhat because we know the punchline. When you know the punchline to the joke, you know, the surprise is out of the bag, so to speak. But anyway, Elton Trueblood wrote this book on the humor of Christ, and he's trying to analyze the things that Jesus said that were quite humorous. Go tell that fox, said Jesus about Herod. Why is it that you want to take the, speck out of your brother's eye when you have a plank in your own? Most of the people that would have heard that the first time would have gone, that Jesus, he's just so funny. We've kind of lost some of that element because of the surprise power, but Jesus used hyperbole a lot. Jesus used the typical three aspects of humor in the Bible: sarcasm, irony, and paronomasia. Paronomasia is a play on words. One example, let the dead bury the dead. Well, that's pretty hard to do if you just press it literalistically, you see. Well, I want to start with a good statement by a man that wrote a book on the humor of Jesus, Elton Trueblood, and this is what he said. One of the chief ways that we are disloyal to God is when we make little what God has made big. Now, that's a good statement in my opinion. I've been guilty of it many times. That when I've kind of shrunken the things that God thinks are quite big deals, I didn't mean to. It just, you get preoccupied with other things and chase other rabbits and go down other trails and take trajectories here and there in your studies and your Christian witness and whatever. But again, let me put it to you. One of the chief ways we are disloyal to God is when we make little what God has made big. I want to talk about a pretty big thing this morning in this first hour. And that is, ready? Buckle up. Salvation. Now, this was the lecture I've been trying to get to since I got here. Okay? I told you we'd try to rise on Thursday morning to this peak of emphasis. And of all the things I say about miracles of Jesus, this is the one I really came to tell you about. I suppose from here on down, we're on a downhill slide, and we'll just try to make it up as we go. But anyway, the salvation issue in the miracle stories, and I call it the salvific issue. That's an old term, but the idea of salvation, of course, means rescue or deliverance. Isn't it great that our salvation in Jesus Christ is kind of like a kaleidoscope? You know what I mean? A kaleidoscope. You look at the light, all the different colors, because there's so many Bible words that describe it. Salvation is a word of rescue. Justification is a word from the courtroom. Reconciliation takes place in a marriage context. What are some of the redemption is a market term. All these great T-I-O-N words, redemption, propitiation, justification, all those big words that describe salvation come at it from several angles. I really think when Paul wrote passages like Romans 3, 21 to 26, or 2 Corinthians 5, 11 to 21, he was trying to push language to the breaking point to describe what happened the day that Jesus died on the cross. He said, well, it's kind of like justification? Well, it's kind of like redemption. Well, it's kind of like propitiation, which your NIV Bible translates sacrifice of atonement. Well, it's kind of like reconciliation. Just like John in the book of Revelation is seeing all these visions and trying to describe what he saw, he says, wow, look at this. He writes it down. One man said he's pushing language to the breaking point. Well, I think in the miracles of Jesus, you get some of that. And this was really what tripped my trigger some years ago, and that was, I began to notice the language of the miracle stories had salvation language in it. As the gospel writers told the miracle stories, I began to notice some language that I thought, that deals with salvation. I thought we dealt with that in the church, and responding to Christ, and baptism, and things like that. So, let me just give you a little bit of this, just to get us going. Let me give you some biblical passages. From the Gospel of Mark, in chapter 1, verse 24, we read these words. The demon-possessed man at the synagogue, very early in the Gospel of Mark, after Jesus has chosen the 4 fishermen to be his disciples. We read in Mark 1:24, where the demons say to Jesus, "Have you come to destroy us before the time?" Well, evidently they know their number is up. They know that the gig is up. They know that judgment is coming. There's a day of judgment and salvation. What about Mark chapter 5, verse 19? We won't spend any time here because this is what I want to talk about tonight. The Gadarene Demoniac. And Jesus said, you go back home and you tell the people how the Lord had mercy on you. And as I've already said in another session, mercy is a word that goes back to the Old Testament word chesed, which means God's loving kindness, his covenantal love. It's a salvation term. Or how about chapter 5, verse 34? When Jesus heals the woman with the flow of blood, we call this in Life of Christ studies, he says, your faith has made you well. It's the Greek word sozo, saved you. And then he says, go in peace. Shalom. I think shalom is a synonym of salvation. I think that was even true for the Apostle Paul, when he said in Romans 5, verse 1, therefore, since we've been justified by faith, we have peace with God. We're in a saved position. Or what about chapter 5, verse 36, if you will? He says to Jairus, when the woman with the flow of blood has interrupted Jesus getting to Jairus' house, he says to Jairus, don't worry, just believe. Well, isn't that how we become Christians? We have to believe in Christ. We have to believe something about Jesus. Or what about chapter 5, verse 39? When Jesus says to the little girl in Aramaic, Talitha kum, little girl, I say to you, arise. And he says to the crowd, which consists of Peter and James and John and the parents, she's not dead, she's only sleeping. Well, now you know from reading your New Testament that sleeping is a euphemism for being ushered into the presence of God. These are salvation words. Or what about chapter 10, verses 47, 48? I'll come to this a little bit later as well, but in our studies, tomorrow in particular, I think. But this is the story about Bartimaeus. And Bartimaeus, you saw it in the video yesterday. Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. So you're beginning to get the idea, death, sleeping, saved, mercy. I begin to think, wait a minute, I thought these miracles were just to prove that Jesus is the Son of God. No, evidently they're part of his saving work because the salvation language is in them. Or what about this one from Luke chapter 5, verse 8? Now, referred to this last night. When Peter, at the great catch of fish, is challenged to be a fisher of men, Jesus says to him what? He says, Peter falls down in the boat and says, depart from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. This is a miracle of a great catch of fish. But he's looking at his own life in the mirror. You know, somebody said when we're young, we make faces at the mirror. When we're old, the mirror gets back at us. And that's true. So he looks in the mirror and sees himself as a sinful man. Or what about Luke chapter 13, verse 16? This is one of my favorites. We won't even have time for this week. But there is a woman that Jesus sees in a synagogue, and she's bent over double. And Jesus says, as he heals her, Satan has bound her for 18 years. Now, I don't know if you've ever known anybody like that, but back in Illinois, where we served for 7 years, there was a man named Delbert Taft. And he was an elder in one of the churches there in the area, and he was always bent over double. He hadn't slept in a bed for years. He slept in a recliner. But when that man made his way and shuffled his way to the Lord's table as one of the elders of that church, and he prayed, you really felt you could have reached out and touched God. Delbert Taft just had one of those great relationships. But we kept praying, can you straighten him up like you did with the woman who Satan bound for 18 years? And Jesus encounters her in the synagogue. Or what about this text from the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verse 38, when the blind man says, Lord, I believe. So again, I begin to notice this, and this was kind of my big wake-up call, if you will. Why is there salvation language in the miracle stories? And that began to send me on my journey. So I want to take you on my journey today. All right? I mentioned I'm the most domestically challenged person in this room. Okay, boiling water, I'd have to get out a book to know how to do that. I'm just not wired to cook things, you know. My wife wants me occasionally to help with cooking things outside on the grill. I have burned more meat than the Levites, okay? So I'm not very good at this. But I can tell you at least this much, is that sometimes you have these wake-up calls, you know, and that would be similar to this kind of thing. Like, whoa, can you just get this? Can you get a hold of this? Why did it take me so long? So I'm going to take you on a journey. Sometimes I've noticed at our table, somebody will say something like this. I think we figured up we had 70 to 80 people or something like that from November 15th to the end of the year in our house. My wife is the hostess with the mostess. Okay, we entertain a lot of people due to her grace. And anyway, we have these people, and sometimes something like this will go on at the dinner table. Oh, Miss Carla, this is so good. How did you, what is in this? This is so delicious. I don't know what the next few moments are like. All I'm hearing is, well, there's about 14 tabs of butter and 4 pounds of sugar, and I don't know what's going on. But anyway, they talk about ingredients, you know, and getting this idea. So there's all there. Well, sometimes people like me, they don't care about how this was made. I just want to know if it tastes good. But sometimes you kind of want to go in the kitchen and see, how did you make that? So I'm going to take you on a journey. Let's go in the kitchen and see if we can figure this all out. Could it be, now I'm going to just kind of number these for you. This was my journey. I'm taking you into the kitchen. I'm taking you into the crafts shop or something here. While not trying to denigrate his teaching and preaching, I would never do that because I'm a preaching professor. One time, our music minister's son called me up. He said, Dad, I got this great quote. I'm going to use it Sunday at church. I said, what's the quote? He said, well, it's from this guy I think he's a sissy. I knew what was coming. I said, you mean St. Francis of Assisi? Yeah. He said, here's the quote. Preach the gospel everywhere you go, and if necessary, use words. Now, I know what St. Francis is saying. I get it. I agree with it. But have you ever thought he used words to say that? So my son says I said, though I don't remember saying this. However, it sounds like something I could have said. He said, when he told me that statement, preach the gospel everywhere you go, and if necessary, use words. I said, son, do you know what I do for a living? I teach people to use words because it is through words that we learn of salvation. And so while I like St. Francis' statement, you might think the way I'm going with this, really put an accent on the miracles and the deeds of Jesus, that I'm denigrating his preaching teaching. I'm not denigrating that. I think he was a powerful preacher. We'll get to a little bit of that in the second session today. But did Jesus start saving the world even before he got to Calvary? I think he did. And I think the miracle stories show that. So here's the second part of my journey. Could it be that the miracles, therefore, become cameos? Now, maybe you'd prefer the word pictures, or does anybody have a camera that works with film anymore? Or digital shots, or your phones, or whatever. Just pictures, if you will, of the not yet redemption. I'm building a case here. Stay with me. So are the miracle stories kind of Jesus saying to us, let me show you what's the future for just a minute. You remember we titled this series of lectures, Miracles, God's Future. God, the future idea of miracles. What's going on? And that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. Now, I put in italics the word not yet. You're familiar with this language, I trust. That our salvation in Jesus Christ is now. Because, especially in the Gospel of John, God's glorious future has in the person of Jesus Christ, and by virtue of our faith in Him, invaded our present. I guess you're aware that the Bible speaks about our salvation in all three tenses. We have been saved even before we were born. That has to do with Christ and the cross. We are being saved right now. God is in the process of continuing to save us, sanctify us, and we will be saved. Paul says to Christians on the first missionary journey in Acts, through many trials we enter the kingdom. Well, they already had entered the kingdom, but they weren't in the final resting place of the kingdom yet. So the scholars talk about it in terms of the now and the not yet. The now and the not yet. That's why when we come to things like we've had the last couple nights with your spirited singing and such like, haven't you ever just felt like on certain Sundays, oh man, we had church today. We really had church today. It was good today. There are times when you just kind of want to say, wow, this has got to be close to glory. It's so good. The now and the not yet. There was a scholar by the name of Oscar Kuhlman who used this kind of language, and this was the image he used from World War II. He said that it's like the difference between D-Day and V-Day. D-Day, the Allied forces, as you know, gathered at Normandy, France, and stormed the continent to try to win back the world from the Nazis. That's D-Day. But the war wasn't over yet, was it? That was just the decisive battle. V-Day would yet remain for a later date. That's his analogy for where we live. We live in the now. Jesus Christ's future has invaded our present. We should be living like we are totally redeemed, even though we're not at our final resting place. Okay? We're kind of taken with the island. We think it's quite beautiful, okay? And you probably think it's beautiful, those of you who live here, and you should, okay? It beats Southwest Missouri, I'll tell you that for sure. But, that being said, even this is not our final resting place, is it? So, we just keep building this. Number 3, stay on my journey, stay in the kitchen. Let's see what we can cook here. Miracles, therefore, become previews of coming attractions. Now, I don't know how it is in Canada, but when we go to the movie theater, which, man, Hollywood would starve to death if they depended on us, because we hardly ever go. And part of it is when we take our grandchildren to see some little animated movie, you know what they have to show you before the feature presentation. A whole bunch of, ways to entice you to come back, and it's blood and guts and gore and sex, and you just think, I don't think I want my grandkids to see this. Anyway, before the feature presentation come the previews. That's what miracles are. Why did I put Revelation 21:1 there? Well, John says, and I saw. Take your book of Revelation one of these days, read through it, and circle every time it says, and I saw. Because Revelation is a series of revelations. And that's why some people put an S on the end of that Bible book's name. It's not Revelations, it's Revelation. But in it is a series of things John saw. And he's trying to describe, pushing language to breaking point to describe what he saw. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. What? There's no water in the new heaven, new earth? Well, I'm going to get pretty thirsty if that's the case, yeah? No, sea is a symbol in the book of Revelation. The dragon stood on the shoreline and brought forth from the sea a beast. You have a trinity of evil. The beast out of the sea, the false prophet out of the earth, and the harlot that sits on 7 hills. That trinity of evil falls in the exact opposite order in the book of Revelation that they are raised in. And the point simply being that he's describing the fact when he says there's no longer sea, he means this is a whole new world. What you're seeing in Revelation 21 is after the smoke of God's judgment of chapter 20 clears away. This is a new world. You would know of the famous name of the famous evangelist Dwight L. Moody. And Moody Bible Institute in Chicago is named after him, and the Moody Church is named after him. But Dwight L. Moody said after his conversion to Christ, this is the way he described it. It was as if I was in a whole new day. The birds sang sweeter, the sun shone brighter, and those old elm branches just waved themselves for joy. What I love about being around a new Christian is they're just so filled with joy that Jesus has saved them. And so the idea is that the future is invaded. What did he say? Saw new heaven, new earth. First heaven, first earth passed away. No longer any sea. And I saw a holy city coming down out of heaven as a bride beautifully. Are you ready for the Greek word? Ladies, cosmeo. Wonder what English word comes from that. As a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And he starts, and there was no longer any death or mourning or pain. For the old order of things has passed away, and God will say, I will dwell with people, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. It's a beautiful picture. And I begin to wonder, is it in the miracle stories that Jesus is pulling back the veil of eternity and for a brief moment letting us look into a perfect world? You following this? Let me say the next thing. So, on my journey, as I notice the salvation language in the miracles, I begin to think maybe all of the miracles, and I am going to say all. Now, some of you might want to press, we got to take every miracle on its own merit, every text on its own merit. It's not right to make these overgeneralizations, so I got to be careful here. And yet I am starting to view now all the miracles, here's the big word, eschatologically. From the word eschaton, which means last. So eschatology is the study of the last things. In other words, we talk about it in terms of the second coming of Jesus Christ and the end time. And I don't know where you are. I haven't even asked Tom or any of the staff here about where people are millennially. Maybe we have some people that are, amillennials. Maybe we have some people that are premillennial. Maybe we have some people that are postmillennial. Chuck Swindoll says he has a friend that's so premillennial he won't even eat post-toasties. Do you know what post-toasties are? Do you have post-toasties here? Anyway, cereal, breakfast cereal. So just the point is, whenever we see Jesus work a miracle, whether he's calming the sea, he cleansing the leper tonight, casting out the demons, raising lame people, it's really a glimpse into the future. That's why it has to do with salvation. So I'm just going to continue to build this. Could it therefore be that this is something we need? Didn't the sick people, why do I say it's a brief moment? Why do I say it's just for a moment we get to see a perfect world? Did the sick people that Jesus healed get sick again? I guess, because they're not here this morning for the lectureship. So I guess they got sick again. And look at this. This may surprise you. I don't know what you believe about demons and demon possession and that sort of thing, but listen to this from Luke chapter 11, beginning with verse 24. Jesus taught these words. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, well, that'd be a wonderful thing. It passes through waterless places. Waterless places? Like desert places? Like barren? Like dry? Do demons live in the depths of the ocean? Do demons live in the deserts? I don't know. Seeking rest and finding none, it says, the demon says, I will return to my house. What's the house? The person. The person's life. I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house swept and put in order. Well, that's a good thing. That's good. But the house is not inhabited. So he goes on to say, then it goes and brings 7 other spirits. I'm assuming the word 7 is symbolic. It means just a full number of spirits. More evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that person is worse than the first. So one question you have to deal with is, can demons ever re-inhabit somebody's life after they have once been released by Jesus? I'm guessing from what this says, yes. Jesus acquits us of our sin and then also equips us with the Holy Spirit. If you don't put the Holy Spirit in place, who's to say that the enemy won't try again? So again, I looked at a miracle kind of as a brief moment. Just for a brief moment, the veil of eternity is pulled back and we get to look into a perfect world. Which brings me to a 6th thing. Maybe when a miracle takes place, it is just a glimpse into a future world that's totally controlled by God. And maybe he does this as a way to kind of, you know what I mean when I use the metaphor, dangle a carrot in front of us. Maybe he's just wanting to get us to anticipate just enough of the future world where we'll kind of hang in there for another day. Maybe that's what miracles are about. Now, stay on my journey. Here's the seventh thing I'd like to say. If miracles are part of his saving work, can we teach them and preach them as part of God's ultimate redemptive plan? So when he raises a little girl from the dead like Jairus' daughter, that doesn't mean he's going to raise everybody from the dead. Did he do that in his ministry? Nope. Did he heal everybody at every time? Nope. Did he cast out every demon that was in the land of Israel in his day? Nope. No, Jesus was quite selective with these miracles, maybe even rare, though his ministry is compressed into 3 years, so it's like a lot to us. And perhaps he just, was trying to just moment by moment give us glimpses of what this would actually look like. I began to look at this whole differently. In fact, we get into all kinds of arguments about where the line of salvation is drawn and all that kind of thing. Like, what about the thief on the cross and all this kind of stuff, Listen, it's Jesus. He can say anything he wants, can he? And if he says, today you'll be with me in paradise, maybe that in itself is a brief moment of salvific concern. Here's where I want to go. This is the eighth thing. This would keep us, if we looked upon these miracles as God's redemptive future invading the present, maybe it would keep us from allegorizing the text or marginalizing Jesus. Now let me deal with that for just a little bit. We're sure we're in place here. Allegorizing, I've referred to this already in the lectures. I mean by allegorizing, not that certain things in the Bible don't have spiritual connotations, because they do. But allegorization means I'm assigning a meaning to the passage that the author did not intend. That's what I mean by allegorizing. So if we find a meaning in one of the miracle stories that the author didn't intend, either the gospel writer or Jesus, then I have overexposed the passage. I have this fear. Now, Ben mentioned the other night that a few people remarked about the message where I said, in the calming of the sea, and other boats were with them. And a few of you remarked, I don't know how many times I've read this story, I never saw that. And I told you the same for me. Other boats were with them. And, the temptation would be to say, well, find things like that and then make big things out of it that the author did not intend. Here's my biggest fear as a preacher. Well, one of my biggest fears. I get to heaven someday and I run into John Mark, who I was named after. He is, we know him as being stump-fingered. Stump-fingered. He evidently had little hands. Look at these. You think that could palm a basketball? I don't think so. Okay? So my hands are kind of small. And John Mark, evidently by tradition, had small hands. They called him stump-fingered. Well, I get to heaven, and John Mark meets me. Hey, welcome to heaven. Nice to see you. Can I comment on that sermon you preached at Maritime Christian College lectureship about the calming of the waters? When you preach that message. I said, oh, please, I'd love the critique. And he says, well, it was a really stunning message. It's not at all what I had in mind when I wrote that passage. That scares me just a bit. That's not what we're after. I don't want us to just let these miracles mean anything. And I sure don't want to do the last thing. Sometimes people can preach from the Gospels and lose Jesus. Jesus is the hero of all these stories. Don't marginalize Jesus. And as much as I think I mentioned this example before to you, John Ortberg, I love his writings and stuff. I ran into John and Nancy Ortberg at where was I? Some airport, Phoenix, I think, here sometime back. They got off the plane as I was waiting for mine. And of course they said, well, hello, Mark. No, they didn't. They don't know me from Adam and Eve. But anyway, so John Ortberg wrote that book. If you want to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. And I like the book, actually. And I think it's true. We have to walk by faith. I'm not denying that. And yet, it almost puts the accent on Peter and his ability. And I don't think that's the point of the story, because at the end of the story, they said, who then is this? That's the hero. So this was part of my journey, and now I need to tell you so those 8 points was where I started to go. And this began to change my thinking about miracles. This is what I finally fought as my problem. I think my problem is this. I used to think all the miracles were just to prove that Jesus is the Son of God. Now I believe they're part of his saving work. My problem was I had too puny of a view of salvation. I viewed salvation with very limited blinders on. I thought it was just about people getting forgiven of their sins. I've already told you, I think that's a big thing. A really big thing. But salvation is much bigger than that. And so I began to try to trace, what does salvation mean? So if I'm giving you my definition or list, here's what it means. The lost are found. The lost are found. One of the greatest chapters on this is Luke 15. There's more lost and found language in Luke 15 than anywhere else in the Bible. The lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost sons. We've talked about it a little bit. So the lost are found. But salvation also means the guilty are forgiven. The gavel hits the bench and God says, not guilty. Free, liberated, guiltless. But thirdly, and this relates to so much of the miracles, the sick are made well. And so when I see Jesus healing somebody, that too was part of saving the world. Was there any flu in Eden? Was there any sickness in the garden? When God walked with man in the cool of the day, and Adam and Eve were just selecting their vegetarian diet, was there any colds, flu, sickness, limping, any fractured bones like I have in this left foot? Just been walking around limping here and waiting for it to go under the knife on April the 11th. I can hardly wait. And so, no, the sick are made well. Part of Jesus' saving work was that. Here's another part. The outsiders are included. I tried to get at this last night with the idea of the leper. Half of the text is about him going back to community. Go to the priest, he'll declare you clean, then you can go back home. That's half the storyline. We can't forget that outsiders are brought in. Sometimes just people feel like so much outsiders. And then another step of this was the world is set right. Do any of you, we were watching your news last night, and it's not a whole lot different than ours. The news tells you every night the same message, Romans 3:23. Isn't that right? All have sinned, fallen short of the glory of God. It doesn't matter what channel you're watching, it's all the same message. So do you ever, like me, I want a world where little girls are not picked up for sex trafficking. I want a world where you don't have to worry, did I lock the car? I want a world where kids don't go hungry. I want a world, am I just kind of, pipe dream here? Am I just, do you want a world where right is vindicated and wrong is eradicated? You remember when you were in school years ago and you'd be working away on your test and Johnny next to you would kind of look over at your paper and you'd raise your hand, teacher, Johnny's copying. And the teacher came back with this sense of justice. Well, Johnny is just hurting himself. Did that satisfy you? No. You want to say, well, I would like to hurt Johnny if it's okay with you. No, somehow, the teacher's right. He's only hurting himself. I get it. And yet that wasn't enough. Why? Because there is in us, as C.S. Lewis said, sort of this thing called conscience, a moral umpire that calls the balls and strikes of life. And when wrong is victorious and right doesn't seem to win the day, we get upset. Where did that come from? I believe it is innate, created by God inside of us. So the world is set right. And now, almost need a drum roll here. This is everything I was wanting to get to, and that is thanks. Yeah, appreciate that. These Bible college guys are right on it, okay? You have to get up at least by 11 o'clock in the morning to beat them. But anyway, I think that the ultimate definition for me of salvation, now not the word salvation means to be rescued or delivered. But the concept, the theology, is the healing of all creation. So if God is trying to get back what rightfully belongs to him, then sickness cannot dwell there. Okay? It's a true state of shalom. Everything at peace, everything well, everything going in the right direction. All right. Now, let me just keep you on this journey for a little longer. I had begun to see this in my reading of the Bible. I hope you have a Bible reading method that I read through Scripture, just not for sermons or lessons. It's just for me, because I need it for me. But pretty soon you notice patterns, and you begin to see when you read and you read and you read. And I began to notice, I think that Jesus' miracles were little previews of coming attractions. I think the miracles are a brief moment of what the new heaven and the new earth someday will look like worldwide. And I base that on the salvation language that I'm talking to you about this morning. But I thought, I don't trust myself, because I am sometimes just dumb as a box of rocks. And I thought, I need to bounce this off a scholar. So, Brother Tom, one of his teachers, one of my teachers, was a brilliant man by the name of Dr. Bob Lowry. He actually studied in Aberdeen, Scotland, under I. Howard Marshall, the great Methodist scholar. And he's an expert on the book of Revelation. He went way too early to his reward. We needed him here longer than we had him. But I have great respect for Dr. Lowry. I don't know how many hours I logged under him, but there were a lot of them, Tom. So we were in a camp in northern Illinois together one time, and I had begun to have this stuff churning in my belly. So I thought, I'm going to bounce this off the good doctor and see how this flies. So I said, Bob, I've been working on the miracle stories. I think they're previews of coming attractions. I think they're brief moments when God lets us look into a world that doesn't have any more sickness or death or mourning or pain. The old order of things has passed away. What do you think about that? And it got a first-class yawn. He just kind of looked at me and said, oh, yeah, well, perhaps. Well, thank you for your tremendous enthusiasm and encouragement here, Bob. It's bowling me over. I don't know what to do with such affirmation. I was really kind of hacked off. So I thought, okay, I must be going down a road that's not all that profound, and I just set it aside. Then, as I mentioned to you earlier in the lectureship, Dr. Mark Moore and I asked Bob to write a chapter on the book for Lynn Gardner, A Humble Defense. And we had him write the chapter on the miracle section, the reality of miracles. That dirty dog. Look what he did. This is Bob Lowry. Actually, you can notice that was a later picture, wasn't it, Tom? When he'd already starting to get much thinner due to his cancer and oncoming death. But on page 138, this is what he says. Miracles are thus a means which God employs for directing history until the time he's established his rule over the entire universe. You twicky wabbit, you. How dare you steal my material? Well, I'm sure he had been thinking about this way ahead of me, and I'm not mad at him at all. I just set this aside for more years, some 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. And when I read his chapter, I thought, oh my goodness. And in the chapter, he quoted somebody else who was saying exactly what I was trying to say. Have you ever done this? You come up with something you think is rather novel and new, and then you read somebody, and somebody said it in the 1800s, and you feel like a spiritual wimp? All right. So in the chapter, Bob Lowry quotes Philip Yancey. You ever heard of Philip Yancey? Now, this is a long quote, so just stay with me. But here's Yancey in the book, The Jesus I Never Knew. I want to read you over several slides here this statement. Here's what he says. Why then any miracles? Did they make any difference? It was in Jesus' nature to counteract the effects of the fallen world during his time on earth. Okay? As he strode through his life, Jesus used supernatural power to set right what was wrong. Can I get an amen on that? Okay. Every physical healing, now look, pointed back to a time in Eden. That word means garden of delight. There was no sin there. When physical bodies did not go blind, get crippled, or bleed nonstop for 12 years. You remember what he's dealing with there. Okay? Next part of the quote. It's a long one. And also didn't just look back to Eden, but also pointed forward to the time of recreation to come. The miracles he did perform, breaking as they did the charms of sickness and death, give me a glimpse of what the world was meant to be and instill hope that one day God will right its wrongs. Are you liking this so far? Then, the last one. To put it mildly, God is no more satisfied with this earth than we are. Kind of glad about that. And Jesus' miracles offer a hint of what God intends to do about it. I think Yancey hit the nail with his head. I think that is spot on. And Bob Lowry, coming from that perspective, writing his chapter on it, is kind of coming, yes, it's the salvation language that somehow gives us a clue that God is going to reverse this world as it is. That's why the parables always sound so upside down. It's not that the parables are upside down, we are. We're the ones that are upside down. We're the ones that need it straightened out. They seem upside down. So here's the syllogism. You ready for the syllogism? Any Aristotle fans out there? Here's the syllogism. Premise A. All sinners will be punished. Premise B. Jack is a sinner. Conclusion. Jack gets a party thrown for him and they kill the fatted calf. Hold it, that's not how this is supposed to go. No, here's how the syllogism should go. All sinners will be punished. Jack is a sinner. So the dad ran out to him and beat the tar out of that boy. That's not what the story says. The story says he threw a party for that prodigal. And that's what I mean. Just like the parables are upside down, so these miracle stories are. God is saying in the miracles of Jesus, I don't like what I see on planet Earth, and I'm going to do something about it. Now that's really what I came to say this week, right, in a nutshell. That's the big thing, that the salvation language set me on a different journey. And it's not just Bob Lowry, and it's not just Philip Yancey. There's another fellow by the name of Gregory Boyd who has written a book called God at War. God at War. And on page 192, he says this. Jesus' miracles over nature, as well as his healings, exorcism, and especially his resurrection, were definite acts of war that accomplished his victory over Satan. Then he says, these acts routed demonic forces and established the kingdom of God and the restoration of a new humanity in the midst of this war zone. And finally, the rest of the quote. In doing this, Jesus set in motion forces that will eventually overthrow the world of this already fatally damaged Satan assault upon God's earth and upon humanity. Is this beginning to make sense to you? I just started noticing, reading my Bible, the salvation language. I begin to think, I think that Jesus is saving the world before he gets to Calvary. He couldn't wait. He was too impatient in the greatest of ways. And so now I guess what I want to say is for us today, when we see what we might call an honest to goodness miracle. I've told you I think they're rare. That's my perspective. Maybe you don't hold that one. That's okay. Maybe you've seen more than I have. But I have said that when you see them, they definitely are a preview of coming attractions. Our children were friends, boys especially, with family in our church in Joplin, whose father actually was in school, Bible college with us, and he came upon difficult times. Was it MS, honey, that he had, or what was it? ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Some of you would know that label. This guy was hindered for many, many years. And they met again to pray for Ron Medlock one night. And the next morning, I don't know how to say it, he was well. He ran down the aisle of the church and it was much higher, the stage, than this one. It was probably double this size. He leaped onto it. He'd been using a cane for years. Now, it wasn't a fix that lasted forever. It lasted years, but in just the last few years, his health was compromised once again, which I think supports the theory. These are quick fixes. They're not intended to be forever. But when God pulls back the veil of eternity and lets us see a genuine miracle that there's no other explanation for this, it's his way of saying, you ain't seen nothing yet. Just you wait. Which brings me kind of to this last, what does all of this mean? Let me put this together for you if I can. First of all, it means this. I think it means that miracles don't happen all the time. So, friends, now again, depending on how you define a miracle, you might play with this one a little bit. But if we're defining it as that stupendous intervention of a supernatural God in a moment of history, I'm going to argue that they don't have to happen all the time. How many lepers do you have to have cleansed? How many blind eyes that you have to be able to see? How many, lame people do you have to have raised? Jesus doesn't have to do this all the time. If A, they're rare, and B, how many pictures of heaven do you want? We're getting to the age where we're starting to have more friends over there than we have over here. Some of you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. In fact, 3 of my 4 college roommates have already died. My wife is a bit anxious. The miracles don't have to happen all the time. Second, where this really helped me was I quit spiritualizing them. Now, sometimes they are spiritualized. To the blind man in John 9, I mentioned this already in our lectureship. The Pharisees teed Jesus up by saying, are we blind too? Well, there's blindness and there's blindness, as we said. And so he says, for judgment I came into the world, that those who don't see might see, and that those who think they see, like you rascals, they won't see. So there is a spiritual connection to this. But I was always having to do something with the miracle stories to make them apply. We preachers want to have something we can apply to our people. And sometimes to do that, we over-principalize or make the text say something that doesn't say. I get a little nervous when people say, let Jesus in the boat of your life and let him calm your troubled waters. I have no doubt that he can do that. But this was a real live storm. So don't make it something else. I told you already that our county is rather famous for tornadoes where we live. And I remember a morning, I think it was in 1974, we headed away from our little apartment to go to school for 7 o'clock class. Yes, students, 7 a.m. class, just saying. Anyway, we got, when we punched the lights off at our apartment, the power went off. I'd gotten up that morning early to study, and I noticed outside the birds were just chirping like crazy. There was kind of a dark green line in the sky, and then dark, gray after that. Anyway, we took off for school, and about got to the little Y at the front of the school where our electronic sign is, and we saw the chapel roof head toward one of the dormitories. And I said to Miss Carla, I think there's a storm. That's what I think. Okay? I'm not gonna, you don't turn around and say, well, the storm is just in your soul. What are you, a Church of Christ scientist? No, that's not true. You can't say that. It's a storm, for heaven's sakes. And I always got nervous when people would want to say, oh, well, it's just, they spiritualize everything. Do you have, boy, I'm going to get in big trouble, but I won't be here too many more days. There was a lady, we're sort of related to her in a twisted sort of way. But anyway, she's one of these that has a sermon for everything. And I love her, and she is a godly woman. She really is. But one day she came in, and I think she said something about how you doing today or whatever. And I just remarked to her and says, well, it's cloudy again today. These are people that always have a sermon for you. And she said, oh, but Brother Mark, if Jesus is our Lord, it's sunshine in our souls. I thought, for heaven's sake, Janet, I was just talking about the weather. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, what alternate universe are you living in? Don't spiritualize these things. Let them be what they are. This is a leper. Let him be a leper. Are there other ways we need cleansed? Of course. But that's not the point. Okay? I'm getting kind of lathered up about this. Number 3. Salvation is a pretty big deal. That's another conclusion I came to. Wait a minute. This is a big deal. These aren't just your little cute sleight of hand magician tricks that Jesus is doing. He's trying to redeem the universe. He doesn't like little kids that get diagnosed with diabetes. He doesn't like the diabetes part. He doesn't like my father, I told you, will turn 92 at the end of this month. He had polio as a boy. He's still trying to walk. He probably shouldn't. He walks on the edge of this foot. He uses his walker, very belabored. The only reason he walks is by the grace of God and the fact that his mother, my grandmother, worked his legs every day when he was a young boy. She refused to think that this boy's going to be crippled. He thought he'd be in a wheelchair by age 50. He's still not in one. Now, somewhat, he's just ornery. Stubborn. But someday, there's no wheelchairs in heaven, folks. Are you following what I'm saying here? Salvation is a big deal. It's a big deal. Here's a final conclusion for you. Every genuine miracle means that we're nearer now than when we first believed. I think this might be one of the greatest eschatological statements in the New Testament. It's only surpassed by the words of Jesus himself in Matthew 24, verse 36. But of that day and of that hour, no one knows, not even the Son. When is Jesus coming? Soon. Well, it's been 2,000 years. How soon? Soon. Okay? Actually, the parables of Jesus indicate there's a delay. The parables indicate that there's a delay in the parousia. The master went away on a long journey. He'll be gone a while. But the epistles seem to say he's coming soon. Here's the point. If Matthew 24, 36 has a parallel in the writings of Paul, it's this one. And Paul says this, we are nearer now than when we first believed. Thank you, Paul. That's a brilliant insight into the obvious. I guess we're closer to heaven today than we were yesterday. That's not brilliant theology, but it's really good eschatology. So every time I see something that to me has the mark that the people of God gathered together, they prayed for this dear soul, that soul got well, and there's no explanation outside the mercy of God that a genuine miracle had been performed in this world. It's a brief moment to say it won't last forever. Either that person's going to get sick again or Jesus is going to show up. Either way, all will be well. You remember the song that used to be on Christian radio? Don't know if you had it up here. The gentle healer came to our town today. I know that someday, though I pray about this every day, God will heal my type 1 diabetic daughters. I pray for it. I pray for healing and a cure every day for them. So far, it's not happened in this world. Their pancreases still don't work. But they will be healed someday. And I know that because of the miracle stories in the Gospels. That Jesus pulls back the veil and says, look at what I can do when all the sources of evil are gone. That's really what I came to say this week. The rest of it is just kind of window dressing. Can I pray? And we'll take a break. Kind Father, in the midst of the daily grind, we sort of need little glimpses into the future. Because a lot of times we're tempted to give up, cave in, stop trying, get discouraged. Would you help us to journey on? Because it's always too soon to quit. Longing for that future world where there is no more sickness, no more death, no more pain, for the old order of things has passed away. In that sense of victory, we offer our thanks for these refreshments. In Jesus' name, amen.